Hello, I'm Tony Myers. Presentation is We Are What We Learn, Statistical Education in UK Undergraduate Sport and Exercise Science Related Degree Programmes. I'm presenting on behalf of a research team which includes myself, Grant Abt, Stuart McCurley-Naylor and Grace Tidmarsh. Introduction. It's considered important that graduates should have strong quantitative and analytic skills in order to improve their employability and career development. It's not just the British Academy that thinks this, the UK government do, and many of those in industry value a workforce that's highly skilled and numerically literate. And our own discipline of sport and exercise science relies heavily upon quantitative methods to generate and evaluate evidence. If we get this wrong, we have to question our understanding of those disciplines because they're evidence-based disciplines, and clearly if we misinterpret the evidence, we can't rely on that evidence to support what we think we know about particular topics. A large proportion of research findings may be false. Certainly there's issues with misinterpreting results, things like underpowered studies, which happen to be frequently found in our discipline, sport and exercise science, inappropriate research designs, questionable research practices such as harking and p-hacking is an issue, and this certainly is the case in sports research as well. So, there's a concern raised by the British Academy regarding a deficit in quantitative skills. There's a gap being identified between what we do in the academic world and in what we might call the real world, in industry. We're aware also of academic pressures leading to the misuse of statistical methods in research, where because people have spent time conducting studies, they want to find a result that they can publish and therefore progress their careers. So this study aims to understand how statistics is taught in sport and exercise undergraduate programmes in UK universities. The idea is to audit the current state of data analysis teaching in sports science to understand academic perspectives on statistics education, informing ongoing research to identify the gap between academic teachings and industry needs. So we've started this process and we intend to follow up with, once we know what's been taught, we know the way it's been taught, to find out where the gap is between academic teaching and industry needs. We used explanatory sequential mixed method design, quantitative initially followed by qualitative. So the qualitative enabled the survey responses, so we got a survey out, we included things, as you'll see in a minute, what we gathered, what people teach, what sort of concepts they teach, how they teach it, and we asked questions about that from people who conducted the survey. So both studies were pre-registered with the Open Science Framework, both the qualitative and quantitative study. So for phase 1, the survey, we surveyed 94 academics from 60 UK institutions, and that was a 62.5% response rate, which was really good. The inclusion criteria was staff employed by HEI offering sport and exercise science related degree programmes, and we excluded anybody that hadn't taught research methods or statistics within the last 5 years. Demographic information: majority of people, 77%, were male, 22% female, 1% other, and 75% white, with 7% European and 18% other. 74% of the respondents were module leads, so they led the modules, the statistics and research methods modules. The survey, which we initially administered across these 94 academics, was a custom designed Qualtrics questionnaire which can be accessed via a phone or laptop or a tablet. It had 29 questions and they included sections on screening data, pedagogical approach, the content that was taught, how effective people thought it was, demographic data, and then interest as well in phase 2, which is the qualitative phase. Question types included multiple choice questions, responses, Likert type scale responses, open-ended questions where text was entered, and so it could be ordinal, nominal or text responses in the survey. Phase 2, the follow-up, qualitative follow-up, 11 participants who completed the survey took part in the focus groups. 2 of those participants were female and the remaining were male. 10 different institutions were represented. Data collection was 3 semi-structured focus group interviews, and on average these lasted 1 hour 10 minutes, and these included 2 to 5 participants in each of the focus groups. These groups are iterative in nature, so if something was discussed in one group that was useful, that informed future topics for the discussion in future focus groups. Quantitative findings were first of all the software that was used. Well, a large number of institutions used SPSS. A large number using Excel, fewer using JASP, which is open source software, JASP or GPair for sample size calculation, and less using things like R or Python, which are not push button. In terms of research design, formulating research questions were covered in depth by 66% of institutions, somewhat covered by 26%, and no institutions didn't cover this, so everybody covered it that was surveyed. Population as a concept was covered in less depth, but somewhat covered, or covered a little. Sampling methods similarly. Sample size estimation though, 28% of institutions, or those surveyed, didn't cover sample size estimation, which is worrying, or only covered it a little bit. 47% only covered it a little bit, and this is a bit worrying given that's an important part of determining credible evidence. Research ethics were covered to a great in depth by 60%. Very few didn't cover it at all, 4%. Types of variables similarly were covered in depth by 58% of those surveyed. Hypothesis testing, p-values were covered in depth by 85% of those who were surveyed, as was the term statistical significance, 84%. Bayes factors much less, so the Bayesian approach, 82% didn't cover it at all. Null hypothesis significant testing was covered again to a large proportion of 70% of institutions covered that. But the Neyman-Pearson approach and Fisherian approach, which that's built upon, in fact that's an uneasy hybrid of those two approaches, were covered much less. In fact 76% didn't cover them, or 68% for the Fisherian approach. And even more so, Shannon values or S values, surprisal values sometimes they're called, 91% of institutions didn't cover that. And these are really useful in actually explaining in concrete terms the probability of p-values, for example. Pre-study and analysis, it was really surprising but also concerning that 50% of those surveyed did not cover open science principles, and even less the idea of pre-registration or registered reports, covered in depth by 1 and 2% of those surveyed. Replication and reproducibility was covered to a little, sort of almost 40%, a little or somewhat, but few in depth. Sampling distributions was covered in somewhat in depth, but not covered in real depth, 24%. Simulations, probably because most of the people tended to use push button software like SPSS. Simulations weren't really included in not covered by 45% of those surveyed. More likely if people use Python or R, I guess, maybe MATLAB. Effectiveness. Now, people were not confident that they prepared students for the sports industry. There were some people who agreed, but a number disagreed or were unsure or slightly disagreed. There's a much stronger response for prepared for dissertation, so it seems like the modules being taught, unsurprisingly I guess, prepare people for dissertations, and to conduct analysis in a practical sense. They also felt conceptual understanding was good, but certainly that's narrow, so it might be good what was taught, but what was taught seemed to be quite narrow in the majority of cases. Qualitative insights. A number of themes were generated. So theme 1, staff's perceptions of research methods and statistics. So staff mostly appeared to fall into teaching or leading on modules rather than actually choosing to teach them. They had their own disciplines, particular sports science disciplines that maybe they preferred to teach on, but they got persuaded to teach research method itself. For example, a participant suggested,
I just got stitched up with having to teach stats at level 5. No one else wants to teach it.
Theme 2, it's maths, engaging students. So students generally, those interviewed felt that students generally did not see the value in research methods and statistics in their lives or in employment, which is at odds really with what industry tend to value. There's a perception that students feared numbers, often sometimes arriving with the baggage of educational experiences at school, and that was a barrier to them engaging in statistics. They were put off by their experiences at school. Participants said,
they go, it's maths, because it's numbers, and it's like it's not maths. Stats is totally different.
Third theme, institution level challenges to implement an alternative software. So there was a wish to move away from subscription software. So SPSS costs money, and if people want to use it after they leave education, they have to pay for it. And certainly open access software such as Jamovia or JASP tended to be something people might like to do, but they felt that there was little appetite to change from wider departments, that SPSS is the done thing, and that was likely to stay. For example, one participant suggested,
so much resistance because everyone is using SPSS in their own research and other modules.
The fourth theme, sticking to the well-worn path of statistics content. So mixed views on the desire to cover the least taught elements at undergraduate level, so those that really weren't taught very much. So for example, Bayesian statistics. So some participants really wanted to teach Bayesian statistics but felt constrained by time, student engagement and specialist statistical skill. Fifth theme, life beyond undergraduate sport and exercise science.
Higher education, I think, is about broadening the horizons and giving them, teaching the way to learn and continue developing.
Theme 6, steps beyond the well-worn path. So more opportunities to bring people across the discipline together for knowledge exchange and opportunities for upskilling was something that actually the participants wanted. So getting together in some sort of forum to be able to do this was something that participants suggested they really would value. Participants suggested things like workshops on particular software or particular statistical approaches and skills would be something they'd value. For example, somebody said,
what's always useful is like little workshops that you have at conferences, because you've got a little bit of time where you can potentially upskill in certain areas.
The idea of a core or essential curriculum developed with sports scientists, statisticians, industry collaborators and students was viewed very positively. So the idea that we could develop something together that was fit for purpose but also engaging for students was something that people welcomed. So there seems to be an inflexibility in academia. The fact that the current status quo has implications for future research quality. So academics mostly take this well-worn path, generally focusing on doing statistics, conducting tests, usually in standard software using SPSS, instead of focusing necessarily on conceptual understanding or broader conceptual understanding. There are contrasting views on the relative effectiveness of students passing tests compared to developing conceptual understanding. Tests are easy to sort of mark, I guess, to see. Conceptual understanding can be more challenging. There were some collaborative projects with industry people mentioned, but responses were generally indicated students were not prepared to work in industry. They were prepared for the dissertation, and actually the participants really weren't sure what industry really wanted. It's important we take steps to improve the quality of sports science graduates, produce graduates' ability to apply critical thinking and data analysis skills in jobs beyond academia. So it's not just about doing research, but it's understanding quantitative data anyway. Improving how we teach alone can only gather so much momentum, and therefore it's imperative what we teach is also improved. So recommendations and conclusion, people embracing a wider range of statistical software and methodologies would be useful because it just broadens people's perspectives. They've got different choices. Developing a core curriculum focused on applying concepts, enhancing alignment with industry and their requirements. Even if industry don't know exactly what they want in terms of data analysis, they know what they want generally, and we can try and look where we could meet data analysis requirements to support those needs. And certainly with the growth of AI, which is exponentially growing in terms of data analysis and other areas, exploring the use of AI to support analysis, what it's good and what it's good at and what it's not so good at, and allowing for a more focused conceptual understanding based on the fact that really a lot of the software may end up being redundant. Some examples there: ChatGPT have got data analysis, Julius AI, etc. will base analysis on Python scripts generally. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it interesting. Some references: